We bullied one small cadet for 16 days, until a human walked in, and in 14 seconds, she broke our entire academy. Look, I have been teaching combat tactics at the Galactic Military Academy for 16 cycles now, and I thought I had seen everything. My name is Vekran, and before you ask, yes, I am a Korthan, which means I stand roughly 8 feet tall, have 4 arms, and possess enough natural armor plating to shrug off most small arms fire. We are not exactly known for our gentle disposition. The Academy, for those of you who have never had the pleasure, sits on the moon of Drakkar Prime. It is where the Galactic Coalition sends its best and brightest, or at least, the ones they hope will not get themselves killed in the first month of actual combat. The facilities are state-of-the-art, the equipment is top-tier, and the training philosophy is, well, let us just say it is traditional. Very traditional. The combat training arena where I spend most of my time is a massive circular space, roughly 200 meters in diameter with observation decks rising up on all sides. The floor is covered in impact-absorbing gel pads that can handle anything short of a direct artillery strike, and believe me, we have tested that claim. The lighting is harsh and bright, designed to eliminate any shadows or hiding spots. There is nowhere to hide, nowhere to run, and that is exactly the point. On this particular morning, which I remember with disturbing clarity, I was overseeing the second cycle training group. These were cadets who had already survived their first 3 months, which honestly surprised me given the quality of some of them. Combat training at the Academy follows a simple principle: sink or swim, fight or fail, adapt or go home in a medical pod. We do not coddle. We do not hold hands. We forge warriors through pressure, pain, and practical application of violence. Standing at the edge of the arena, datapad in 2 of my hands, protein drink in another, I watched the sparring matches with the enthusiasm of someone who had seen this exact scenario play out 1,000 times before. Same moves, same mistakes, same predictable outcomes. And then there were the 3, Krazok, Venix, and Vorlak. Oh, where do I even start with these specimens? Krazok was a Drakenari, one of those reptilian species that prides itself on having conquered 12 systems before they even developed faster-than-light travel. He stood 7 feet tall, covered in red and black scales, with a tail that could break bones and an attitude that could clear a room. Venix was a Gorvax, built like a tank had a baby with a battering ram, all muscle and aggression with those charming tusks that jutted out from his lower jaw. Vorlak, the smallest of the 3 at a mere 6.5 feet, was a Xanthari, and those bug-eyed psychopaths are known throughout the galaxy for their complete lack of empathy and their disturbing enjoyment of causing pain. These 3 had been at the Academy for almost a full cycle, which made them veterans by cadet standards. They had formed what you might generously call a training group, but what everyone else accurately called a gang. They moved together, fought together, and most importantly, they hunted together. Their favorite prey, and yes, I use that word deliberately, were the cadets from what the warrior species liked to call the softer races. The diplomats, the engineers, the scientists who had been drafted into military service because the coalition requires everyone to serve at least 1 tour. These poor souls were not built for combat, not mentally, not physically, and certainly not emotionally. I watched as Krazok circled a Pilian cadet named Rento. The Pilians are a small, furry species known for their exceptional mathematical abilities and their unfortunately fragile bone structure. Rento was maybe 4 feet tall, his large eyes darting nervously as he tried to maintain a defensive stance that his instructors had drilled into him. His hands, small and delicate, shook as he held them up. "Come on, little squeaker," Krazok hissed, his forked tongue flicking out between his teeth. "Show me what you learned. Show me you deserve to be here." Venix and Vorlak stood nearby, arms crossed, watching with obvious amusement. They had already finished their sanctioned matches for the morning, and were now, technically, just observing. Which was fine. Encouraged, even. We wanted cadets to study each other, to learn from watching. The fact that they were really just waiting for their turn to torment Rento, well, that was not technically against the rules. Rento made a clumsy attempt at a strike, a textbook jab that Krazok deflected with contemptuous ease. The Drakenari's counter was not textbook. It was a full-force palm strike to Rento's chest that sent the smaller cadet flying backward across the gel mat, gasping for air. "Pathetic," Krazok announced to no one in particular. I made a note on my datapad. "Krazok, excessive force, but within acceptable parameters. Rento, poor situational awareness, needs improvement in defensive positioning, standard observations, clinical, professional. The other instructors, Halvik and Soren, stood nearby with their own datapads, making their own notes, wearing their own expressions of bored indifference. This was just another day. This was just how things worked. The strong dominated, the weak adapted or washed out, and the galaxy kept spinning. Halvik, a fellow Korthan with more scars than sense, glanced over at me and shrugged two of his arms. Kid needs to toughen up or transfer to logistics. Agreed, I replied. Because what else was I going to say? Survival of the fittest was not just our philosophy, it was our religion. The galaxy was a dangerous place filled with species that would happily wipe you out if you showed weakness. Better that these cadets learn that here in a controlled environment with medical staff on standby than out in the black where mistakes got you and your entire unit killed. That was what I told myself anyway. That was what we all told ourselves. Rento struggled to his feet, wheezing, one arm wrapped around his ribs. His eyes were wet, but to his credit, he was not crying. Not yet. He stumbled back into position, raising his shaking hands again. Krazok laughed, a sound like gravel being crushed.
Oh, you want more?
I like that. I like the ones who keep getting up. He liked it because it meant he could keep knocking them down. Lennox cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing across the arena. My turn next. And that, right there, was the morning routine at the Galactic Military Academy. Brutal, efficient, and completely normal. We had been running combat training this way for decades, and it had produced some of the finest warriors in Coalition history. It had also produced a lot of broken cadets, but nobody talked about those. I took a long drink from my protein shake and settled in to watch round 2. Just another day at the office. Just another group of cadets learning the hard way that the universe does not care about fairness. I had no idea that everything was about to change. No idea at all. The thing about patterns is that they become invisible once you see them enough times. What starts as notable becomes normal, and what starts as normal becomes just background noise. Over the next 2 weeks, Rento's daily beatings became as routine as morning calisthenics. Day 3, then Nix decided it was his turn. The Gorvax had all the subtlety of a meteor strike and twice the impact. During what was supposed to be a grappling exercise, he lifted Rento clean off the ground and slammed him down hard enough that the gel mat made a sound I had never heard before, like a wet cough. Rento did not get up for a full minute, and when he did there was blood leaking from his nose, staining his uniform. I noted it. Then Nix. Effective use of strength advantage. Rento failed to maintain center of gravity. Medical staff cleaned him up. Training continued. Day 5. Vorlak got creative. The Xanthari preferred psychological warfare to pure physical dominance, which honestly made him more dangerous. He spent an entire sparring session just talking, his voice a constant hiss of venom. Your people should have stayed in their burrows. You are prey, Rento. You will always be prey. No amount of training will change what you are born to be. Every sentence was punctuated with a strike, not hard enough to incapacitate, just hard enough to reinforce the message. Pain as punctuation, fear as education. Rento's performance dropped 23% that week. Day 7. All 3 of them worked him over in sequence during free sparring. Krazok first, softening him up with body blows, then Nix second, using those tree trunk arms to batter his defenses. Vorlak last, surgical and cruel, targeting joints and pressure points. By the end, Rento was on his hands and knees, trembling, trying not to vomit on the mat. Halvik actually yawned while watching. Anyone else getting bored with this? Sorent asked, scrolling through his datapad without looking up. It will resolve itself, I replied, which was instructor code for either the victim would get stronger or they would quit. Either outcome was acceptable. The other cadets learned quickly to keep their heads down. There were 45 cadets in the second cycle group, representing 23 different species, and not one of them said a word. They would watch, faces carefully neutral, and then immediately find somewhere else to be when the sessions ended. Nobody wanted to be next. Nobody wanted to attract the attention of Krazok and his friends. I caught a Telexian cadet named Mira, staring once, her face twisted with obvious disgust. Telexians are an insectoid species, fragile but fast, and Mira had actually scored well in her individual assessments. She had potential. She also had sense, because the moment Denix glanced in her direction, she suddenly became very interested in her own footwork drills. Another cadet, a young Phyrexian called Jolf, actually started to move forward once when Rento took a particularly nasty hit to the jaw. Phyrexians are mammalian, pack-oriented, with strong protective instincts. Jolf made it 3 steps before his training partner, a Skrell named Vosh, grabbed his arm and shook his head. A silent conversation happened in that moment. Do not, just do not. It is not worth it. Jolf stopped moving. The pattern continued. Day 10, Rento showed up with his left eye swollen nearly shut from the previous day's training. He did not report it. He did not complain. He simply took his position in the arena and waited for whatever was coming. That, perversely, was exactly the kind of determination the Academy claimed to value. Persistence in the face of adversity, refusal to quit. Of course, we all knew there was a difference between determination and having no other choice, but again, nobody talked about that. Krasok was feeling particularly energetic that morning. Look at you, still standing, still coming back. You know what? I almost respect that, almost. He circled Rento like a predator, tail swishing behind him. But respect does not change facts. You are weak. This academy is no place for the weak. The beating that followed was clinical, efficient. Krasok had learned exactly how much damage he could inflict while staying just inside the acceptable parameters. Bruises, yes. Mild contusions, certainly. Broken bones? No. That would trigger a formal review. He rode that line with practiced ease. We let him. Day 12. I overheard Denix and Vorlak discussing Rento in the instructor lounge. They were eating, laughing, completely at ease. I give him another week, Denix said around a mouthful of protein mash. He has that look now, the broken look. I will take that bet, Vorlak replied. 2 weeks. The little ones are always more stubborn than they appear. They were betting on when he would quit. I said nothing. I sipped my stimulant beverage and reviewed training schedules. Here is the thing about the Galactic Military Academy that the recruitment hollows do not tell you. Our reputation is built on producing survivors. Warriors who have been tested beyond their limits and came out harder on the other side. The Coalition has been using our graduates for 3 generations, and the success rate speaks for itself. Battalions led by Academy graduates have 78% higher survival rates in combat situations. Our alumni include decorated generals, legendary tacticians, and heroes whose names are known across 100 worlds. That reputation is everything, and that reputation is built on a very specific philosophy. We do not protect cadets from each other because the galaxy will not protect them from the enemy. We do not intervene in dominance displays because command structure in combat is built on dominance. We do not stop the strong from overwhelming the weak because war is exactly that. The strong overwhelming the weak over and over until one side has nothing left. Sink or swim. Fight or fail. Adapt or die. The Academy Board loved our results. The Coalition kept sending us cadets, and everyone conveniently ignored the 30% washout rate and the persistent rumors about training methods that crossed lines. Day 14, Rento stopped talking entirely. He would show up, take his beating, go to medical, and then disappear to wherever cadets went when they wanted to be alone with their failures. His performance metrics were in free fall. His response times had slowed. His defensive techniques had degraded to the point where he was basically just covering his head and hoping for the best. Krasok noticed. You are not even trying anymore, are you? You are just waiting for it to be over. Rento said nothing. Pathetic. Nix and Vorlak watched with growing satisfaction. They had won. They knew it. Everyone knew it. Rento was done. It was just a matter of time before he officially withdrew. Day 15, during morning formation, I noticed Rento swaying slightly. His eyes were unfocused. There were bruises on top of bruises, a palette of purple, yellow, and green across his arms and neck. When the formation was dismissed, he moved like someone 3 times his age. Halvik noticed too. He is about to crack. Should have cracked week 1, Soent replied. Stubborn little rodent. I opened my mouth to respond, to say something, to maybe suggest that we had pushed this particular lesson far enough, but then I closed it again. What was I going to say? That we should intervene, that we should stop cadets from learning the harsh realities of military life, that we should coddle someone who clearly was not cut out for combat. The words would not come because I did not believe them. Day 16, Krazak cornered Rento before training even officially started. "Today is going to be special," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Today, I think we find out what you are really made of." The threat hung in the air, heavy and obvious. Not one cadet met Rento's eyes. Not one instructor moved to stop it. And that was when she arrived. The notification came through my datapad at approximately 0700 hours, right as I was preparing for morning training. Official transfer notice, Coalition Command, immediate integration into observation rotation. 1 human officer, exchange program, duration indefinite. I stared at the screen for a solid 10 seconds. A human. They were sending us a human. Now, I am not going to pretend I knew much about humans beyond the basics. They had joined the Coalition maybe 15 cycles ago, brought in as a client species under Raxian sponsorship. Their home planet Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world, which sounds impressive until you realize that classification system goes up to Class 20, and there are plenty of species from far worse environments. The Vraxians, who have a tendency toward dramatic exaggeration, had made some noise about human potential, but the Vraxians also once tried to convince everyone that their domesticated food animals were sentient, so their judgment was suspect. Humans were small, humans were soft, humans had no natural weapons, no armor plating, no environmental resistances worth mentioning. They were basically ambulatory prey animals who got lucky enough to develop technology before something ate them. This was the species they were sending to observe elite military training. Sure, fine, whatever. She arrived during the morning briefing, walking into the instructor ready room without ceremony or announcement. The door simply opened, and there she stood, Lieutenant Maya Torres, according to the name strip on her uniform. My first thought was how incredibly average she looked. She stood maybe 5.5 feet tall, which put her well below the height of every instructor in the room. Her build was lean, compact, the kind of physique that suggested endurance rather than power. Her skin was a medium brown tone. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes were dark, almost black. She wore the standard Coalition Observer uniform, gray and unadorned except for her rank insignia and a small flag patch I assumed represented Earth. She looked like she weighed maybe 140 pounds soaking wet. She looked like a strong breeze could knock her over. She looked utterly, completely aggressively unremarkable. "Lieutenant Torres, reporting as assigned," she said. Her voice was calm, neutral, with a slight accent I could not place. "I will be observing your training protocols for the next several weeks. Please continue your normal operations. I am here to learn, not to interfere." Halvik snorted, not even bothering to hide it. "Understood, Lieutenant. Try to keep up." She smiled slightly, a small upturn of her lips that did not reach her eyes. "I will do my best." We filed out to the arena, the human following several paces behind. I noticed she moved quietly, her footsteps barely audible even on the metal decking. Efficient movement, minimal wasted energy, professional I supposed, but hardly impressive. The morning session began as scheduled. Standard drills, standard rotations, standard expectations. Krazak and his companions were already on the floor, warming up with exaggerated stretches and loud commentary clearly designed to establish dominance before official sparring even began. Rento stood alone at the far side of the arena, and even from a distance I could see him shaking. Lieutenant Torres took up a position at the edge of the observation area, arms crossed loosely, weight balanced evenly on both feet. She said nothing. She simply watched. I forgot she was there within 5 minutes. The drills proceeded normally. Grappling exercises first, then striking combinations, then free sparring. Krazak made sure he was paired with Rento for the free sparring segment. What a surprise. What a completely unpredictable development. The beating started exactly as it had for the past 16 days. Krazak circling, taunting, testing, Rento trying desperately to defend, failing, taking hits. Lenix and Vorlak watching from the sidelines, grinning. The other cadets suddenly very focused on their own drills. I was making notes on my datapad when I felt it. A change in the air. A shift in temperature, or pressure, or something I could not quite name. That awareness you get when you are being watched by something dangerous, some predator you have not spotted yet. Every combat instructor develops that sense, that ability to detect threat even when you cannot see it. I looked up. Lieutenant Torres had not moved. Her posture had not changed. Her expression remained completely neutral. But her eyes, those dark, dark eyes, were fixed on the center of the arena with an intensity that made my backplates itch. She was still watching. But now, she was really watching. Krasok landed a particularly solid hit to Rento's ribs. The pillion went down hard, gasping. Lennox laughed. Vorlak clapped his hands together in mock applause. I glanced at the human. Her jaw had tightened. Just slightly. Just enough. Rento struggled to his feet, and Krasok shoved him back down with one clawed hand. Stay down, little squeaker. You are done. But Rento, stubborn and broken and entirely out of options, tried to get up again. Krasok raised his foot, clearly intending to step on Rento's back to pin him to the mat in front of everyone. And that was when Lieutenant Maya Torres uncrossed her arms. She did not say anything. She did not call out. She simply started walking. Directly toward the center of the arena. Her boots made small, precise sounds against the gel mat. Click, click, click. Each step perfectly measured, perfectly calm, perfectly controlled. She moved like water, like gravity, like something inevitable. Every head in the arena turned. Every conversation stopped. Even Krasok paused, his foot hovering above Rento's back, confusion flickering across his reptilian features. The human walked through the ring of watching cadets like they were not there. She walked past Lennox and Vorlak, who straightened involuntarily. She walked directly to where Krasok stood over Rento. And then she stopped, 3 feet away, and she looked at him. Just look. I have been in combat. I have faced enemies that could tear me apart with their bare appendages. I have stared down predators that made Krasok look like somebody's pet. But I have never in my entire life seen a look like the one Lieutenant Maya Torres gave the Draknari cadet. It was not anger. Anger would have been easier to process. It was assessment. Cold, clinical, complete assessment. The look a butcher gives a carcass. The look a surgeon gives a tumor. The look a professional gives a problem that is about to be solved. Her eyes moved from Krasok's face, down to his raised foot, over to where Rento lay gasping on the mat, and then back up to Krasok's face. She did not blink. She did not move. She just looked at him. And Krasok, 7 feet of scales and muscle and veteran cadet arrogance, slowly lowered his foot to the mat. The arena was absolutely silent. The silence lasted maybe 3 seconds, which does not sound like much until you are standing in an arena with 70 beings holding their breath at exactly the same time. 3 seconds felt like 3 hours. Krasok recovered first. Because of course he did. Bullies always recover first. That is part of their design. Can I help you, Lieutenant? He asked, injecting just enough respect into his tone to stay barely inside regulation while making it absolutely clear he did not mean a word of it. This is cadet-free sparring time. Observers are supposed to observe from the observation area. You know, the area specifically designated for observation. A few scattered chuckles from the watching cadets. Nervous laughter, but laughter nonetheless. Lieutenant Torres did not acknowledge the comment. Her eyes remained fixed on Krasok with that same unnerving intensity. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, conversational even. Step away from the cadet. Not a request, not quite an order. Something in between that somehow carried more weight than either. Krasok's tail twitched. With respect, ma'am, this is a training exercise. Academy regulations clearly state that instructors and observers are not to interfere with cadet sparring unless there is imminent risk of permanent injury or death. This is just standard combat training. Step away from the cadet. Torres repeated in exactly the same tone, with exactly the same volume. Like she was reading a grocery list. Like she had all the time in the world. Like nothing Krasok said mattered even a little bit. Lennox stepped forward from the sideline, his bulk casting a shadow across the mat. Listen, human, we appreciate the coalition exchange program and all, but you clearly do not understand how things work here. This is how we train warriors. This is how we have always trained warriors. Maybe on your little planet you coddle the weak, but here we prepare them for reality. Torres turned her head, slowly, to look at Lennox. The movement was precise, controlled, like a targeting system acquiring a new priority. And you are. Cadet Denix, ma'am. Second cycle advanced combat certification, top 15% of my class. Congratulations, Torres said flatly. Step back. Vorlak moved to flank her other side. The three of them, Krazak in front, Denix and Vorlak to either side, forming a loose triangle around the small human woman. Classic pack tactics. Establish numerical superiority. Create multiple threat vectors. Force the target to divide attention. I should have stopped it right there. That was my job, to stop it. But I was frozen, datapad forgotten in my hands, watching something I could not quite process. Some part of my brain, the part that had kept me alive through 2 wars and 17 combat drops, was screaming at me that I was watching something important. Something dangerous. Look, Krazak said, spreading his arms in a gesture of reasonableness. Nobody wants trouble here. You are new, you are unfamiliar with our protocols. That is fine. Why don't you just head back to the observation deck? Let us finish our training and we can all file nice reports about cultural exchange and mutual understanding. Torres looked at him for a long moment. Then, impossibly, she smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the kind of smile that apex predators probably wore right before they introduced their prey to the concept of the food chain. No, she said simply. Krazak's eye ridges drew together. Excuse me? I said no. Torres took 1 step forward. 1 small step. Krazak was 7 feet tall and outweighed her by at least 200 pounds. But somehow he was the one who stepped back. You have 3 seconds to move away from that cadet and exit this arena. 1. You cannot be serious, Vorlak hissed. 2. This is insane. Denix rumbled. You are way out of line, Lieutenant. 3. Krazak made his decision. I saw it in his eyes, that moment where arrogance overrode survival instinct. He was going to put this uppity human in her place. He was going to teach her how things worked. He was going to establish dominance like he had been doing for the past 16 days. He lunged. Full extension, claws out, targeting her center mass, a strike that would have sent most species through the wall. Fast, brutal, and according to Academy regulations, completely justified as self-defense against an aggressive observer. He was so confident, right up until the moment Torres was not there anymore. I barely saw her move. 1 instant she was directly in his path. The next she was somehow beside him, her body angled, her weight shifted, her left hand catching his extended arm at the wrist. Not grabbing, catching, like you might catch a thrown ball, and then she moved. There was no wasted motion, no unnecessary flourish. She turned, used his own momentum against him, and performed what I later learned humans call a hip throw. Krazak, all 7 feet and 300 pounds of him, went airborne. Actually airborne. His tail whipped around, his arms flailed, his eyes went wide with shock. He hit the mat with a sound like a cargo container being dropped from orbit. The entire arena shook. Denix roared and charged. Torres dropped low, impossibly low, her legs sweeping out in an arc that caught the Gorvax behind his knee. Denix's charge became a stumble, became a fall, and then Torres was on top of him, 1 knee pressed against his spine, 1 hand gripping his arm at an angle that made him grunt in pain. Stay down, she said quietly. Vorlak, showing more intelligence than his friends, pulled a training blade from his belt. Non-lethal, coated in impact gel but still a weapon. You are making a very big mistake, he said. Torres looked up at him, still kneeling on Denix's back. Put it down. Oh, what, human? You are going to fight all of us? You are going to take on 3 veteran cadets by yourself? Torres stood slowly, releasing Denix, who scrambled away from her like she was radioactive. She rolled her shoulders once, a casual gesture, and when she spoke, her voice carried across the entire arena. I have fought 40 insurgents in urban terrain with nothing but a knife and a bad attitude. I have held a position against armored assault for 6 hours with a broken leg and 3 bullets in my chest. I have pulled my teammates out of burning vehicles while under active fire. She took 1 step toward Vorlak. Do you really, truly, honestly think 3 bullies with training weapons are going to be a problem for me? Vorlak dropped the blade. Krazak was trying to get up, making small wheezing sounds. Torres walked over to him, crouched down beside him and said something too quiet for anyone else to hear. Whatever it was, it made the Dracnary's eyes go very, very wide. Then she stood, walked over to where Rento was still lying on the mat, and offered him her hand. He stared at it like she was offering him a live grenade. "Come on, cadet," she said gently. "Up you go." Rento took her hand. She pulled him to his feet with surprising strength, steadied him when he swayed, and then turned to face the instructor's platform where Halvik, Sorrent, and I stood like statues. "Gentlemen," Lieutenant Torres said, her voice carrying that same conversational tone, like she had not just dismantled 3 veteran cadets in under 15 seconds. "I believe we need to have a discussion about your training protocols, specifically the parts where you allow systemic abuse and call it education." My datapad slipped from my hand and clattered on the deck. Torres brushed a strand of hair that had come loose from her bun, tucked it behind her ear, and walked toward the exit. She paused at the edge of the arena, looked back at the 70-some cadets who were staring at her with expressions ranging from terror to awe. "Class dismissed," she said. "Nobody move. That means you can go," she clarified. The cadets scrambled for the exits like the arena was on fire. Lieutenant Maya Torres, all 5.5 feet of her, walked out of the combat training arena like she had just finished a light morning jog. The door closed behind her with a soft hiss. In the silence that followed, Krasok finally managed to get to his hands and knees. Denix was clutching his shoulder. Vorlak was just sitting on the mat, staring at nothing. Halvik turned to look at me, all 4 of his eyes wide. What in the name of the void just happened? I had absolutely no answer for him. I spent the next 4 hours in my quarters, staring at my data terminal, reading through Lieutenant Maya Torres's military record. Then I read it again. Then I read it a 3rd time because surely I was misunderstanding something. The translation algorithms must have been malfunctioning. The data must have been corrupted. Something had to be wrong. Nothing was wrong. Lieutenant Maya Torres, age 32 by human years, had enlisted in the Earth Defense Force at 18. She served in what humans called the Marine Corps, which apparently was their elite rapid response force. Her record was, and I am choosing my words carefully here, absolutely terrifying. 4 combat deployments to active war zones, 17 confirmed enemy kills in close quarters combat, 3 medals for valor, including one called the Navy Cross, which my research indicated was the 2nd highest combat decoration humans could award. She had been shot 4 times, stabbed twice, caught in an explosion that collapsed a building on her, and once survived a 40-foot fall when her dropship was hit by anti-aircraft fire. She had walked away from all of it. But the part that made my blood run cold, the part that I kept rereading, was buried in her psychological evaluation. Standard personality assessment, required for all coalition exchange officers. Under the section labeled Combat Behavior Patterns, the evaluator had written a single sentence that I will remember until the day I die. Subject demonstrates extreme protective aggression toward vulnerable squad members, with documented willingness to engage superior numbers when personnel under her perceived care are threatened. Perceived care. Rento had been under her perceived care for all of 3 minutes. 3 minutes, and she had decided he was worth fighting for. The Academy Board convened an emergency session that afternoon. I was called to testify, so was Halvik. So was Soren. We sat in a conference room that suddenly felt far too small, facing Academy Director Jarn, a Thalaxian who had been running this institution for 20 cycles, and who looked like he had aged 10 more overnight. "Explain to me," Jarn said slowly, his multiple eye stalks focusing on each of us in turn, "how 3-second cycle cadets ended up in medical with injuries severe enough to require regenerative treatment after an encounter with an unarmed observer." I explained. I left nothing out: the pattern of abuse, our deliberate non-intervention, the confrontation, the 15-second dismantling of 3 cadets we had all assumed were among our best. Jorn listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a very long time. "Lieutenant Torres has filed a formal complaint," he said finally, detailing what she describes as systemic tolerance of abuse masquerading as training philosophy. She has also submitted her own analysis of our combat curriculum, highlighting 17 separate protocols that violate coalition standards for treatment of military personnel. She did this in 4 hours. 4 hours, and she found 17 violations that our own internal review process somehow missed for 3 generations. Helvik shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, with respect, her species has only been in the coalition for 15 cycles. She cannot possibly understand the traditions and methods that have made this academy successful." "Her species," Jarn interrupted, and his voice could have cut steel, recently concluded a planet-wide conflict that lasted for most of their recorded history. They spent roughly 6,000 years perfecting the art of killing each other with increasingly horrific efficiency. They built weapons that could sterilize their entire planet, multiple times. They have more words for different types of warfare than most species have for food. And when they finally stopped fighting each other and looked up at the stars, do you know what they brought to the coalition? None of us answered. The most sophisticated combat doctrine anyone has seen in 2 centuries. Tactics that are being studied at every major military academy in coalition space. Training methods that somehow produce soldiers with 89% higher survival rates than the galactic average. Jean leaned forward. We invited them to observe us, gentlemen. Turns out they were being polite when they accepted. The consequences came swiftly. Krasok, the Nix, and Vorlak were removed from the combat program. Not expelled, because technically they had not violated any written regulations, but transferred to support roles where their capacity for cruelty could not be weaponized against their peers. Logistics, maintenance, inventory, they would graduate but they would never see combat, Krasok complained. Once, he filed a formal protest demanding his combat certification be reinstated. Lieutenant Torres volunteered to personally oversee his re-evaluation. He withdrew the protest within an hour. Halvik and Sorrent were placed on administrative review. I escaped formal censure, mostly because I cooperated fully with the investigation, but my record now carried a permanent notation: failure to intervene in cadet welfare situation. Those words would follow me for the rest of my career. The Academy implemented new protocols within a week. Mandatory intervention standards, regular psychological evaluations for all cadets, anonymous reporting systems for abuse, a complete overhaul of what we were allowed to call training and what we had to honestly label as hazing. The washout rate dropped to 12% within 2 cycles. Survival rates for Academy graduates in actual combat increased by 19%. Turns out soldiers who are trained without being broken tend to perform better under pressure. Who knew? I saw Lieutenant Torres one more time before she rotated to her next assignment. She was in the arena, working with Rento on his defensive techniques. Patient, methodical, encouraging. He was improving. Actually improving, not just learning to take punishment more quietly. I approached carefully. Lieutenant, I owe you an apology. She looked at me and I flinched despite myself. Yes, you do. I told myself I was preparing cadets for reality, for combat, for the harshness of military life. And instead you were teaching them that power without accountability is acceptable, that cruelty is strength, that survival means letting others suffer. She shook her head. You were not preparing them for combat, Instructor Vekran. You were preparing them to become the kind of officers who get their own people killed. She was right. I knew she was right. How did your people figure it out? How did humans develop training methods that actually work? Torres smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. We spent 6,000 years getting it wrong first. We brutalized our soldiers. We broke them. We threw them into meat grinders and called it glory. And then eventually, slowly, painfully, we learned that the strongest warriors are not the ones who survive abuse. They are the ones who are trained with discipline, with respect, with the understanding that their lives have value. She turned back to Rento. Even the small ones, even the scared ones. Especially them. I watched her work for a few more minutes, then returned to my duties. I had reports to file, protocols to relearn, an entire career's worth of assumptions to dismantle. That night I pulled up the Coalition's files on Earth again. Class 12 Death World, gravity 1.2 times standard. Atmosphere containing trace toxins, weather patterns categorized as aggressively hostile, predator saturation level classified as extreme, evolution driven by 10,000 generations of constant competition. And I finally understood. Humans were not dangerous because they were strong, or fast, or particularly well armed. Humans were dangerous because they had spent their entire existence learning hard lessons in the worst possible school, and they remembered every single one. They knew what broke people, because they had been broken. They knew what built warriors because they had built themselves from the rubble of countless failed societies. They knew, in a way, the rest of us had forgotten. The true strength is not about who can inflict the most pain. It is about who can endure, adapt, protect, and still choose kindness when cruelty would be easier. I am still teaching at the Academy. I am better at it now. My cadets actually like me, which is strange and uncomfortable and honestly kind of nice. The washout rate in my classes is now 8%, the lowest in the academy. And every morning when I walk into that arena, I remember Lieutenant Maya Torres, 5.5 feet tall, 140 pounds, absolutely unremarkable, right up until the moment she was not. Never ever underestimate a human, especially not the quiet ones.